With that, I would love to jump in and introduce the three speakers we have for today, which is awesome. So our first speaker is Jordan Green, who is the Terrestrial District Biologist with the Virginia Department of Wildlife Resources. Jordan is a Virginia native and a graduate of Virginia Tech, where he earned a degree in wildlife science and a degree in interdisciplinary studies. Jordan has worked in 9 different states with various federal, state, and nonprofit organizations, including 4 years as a bear biologist in Florida. Jordan has served the 6-county Northern Virginia District for 4 years. Our second speaker is Dr. Katherine Edwards, Wildlife Management Specialist with the Fairfax County Police Department. Dr. Katherine Edwards is the Fairfax County Wildlife Management Specialist and is responsible for implementing wildlife conservation and management programs, including the Fairfax County Deer Management Program and the Canada Geese Management Program, and she provides guidance for addressing human-wildlife conflicts. She is a certified wildlife biologist with over 20 years of experience. She's been involved in a diverse array of wildlife research, inventory, and management projects focused on full-breeding amphibians, gopher tortoises, bats, and white-tailed deer. Dr. Edwards received her bachelor's degree in biology from the University of Virginia, her master's degree in wildlife science, and doctorate in forest resources from Mississippi State University. Our third speaker is Bill Browning, the Public Education and Outreach Committee Chair for the Arlington Regional Master Naturalists. Bill Browning has been a certified Virginia Master Naturalist, a Virginia Cooperative Extension Program, since 2013 and completed the Audubon Naturalist Society Natural History Field Studies Program in 2018. He spent the bulk of his professional career as an international economist, and he's found renewed passion for the natural world in his retirement. For about a decade, he's been working to help rehabilitate our local forests and improve their habitat for native flora and fauna. So with that, I would appreciate you welcoming our speakers, and I'm excited to learn more about deer. Thanks so much.
Good morning, everybody. You're probably wondering why there are 3 speakers for one topic, and I'll get into that. But first, why are we talking about deer when there's so many other wonderful animals to talk about and valued species? So first of all, deer are a prominent species in society. They're highly visible. They're valued by hunters and wildlife viewers, but also involved in lots of conflict with people, and that includes plant damage, vehicle collisions, impacts to forest regeneration. The decline and recovery of white-tailed deer is a good case study for the way management can evolve for all sorts of wildlife over time. As a result, and changes in abundance, societal needs, better understanding of biology, etc. So kind of the main reason behind this being 3 presenters is this is a partnership. And to have the most robust success, we really need good partnerships, and really everyone plays a role. My key takeaway from this presentation from the 3 of us really is that everyone has a voice. What you do matters, and it's because we're a part of our natural resources, and we all need to take a part of that. So looking at the history of deer in Virginia, the white-tailed deer is native to Virginia. Its scientific name is Otocoleus virginianus, meaning Virginia deer. The habitat that European settlers encountered in Virginia was not unbroken forest. Habitat varied across the landscape due to fires, diseases, floods, storms, beavers, and other disturbances. Deer responded well to natural and human disturbances and were more abundant where the land supported young vegetation. In other words, young forests, or what we call early successional growth. Deer were important to native people in Virginia, as well as early European colonists, for food, for clothing, for tools, for arrowheads, for cordage like bowstrings, for jewelry, for soap, for blankets, and trade goods. Just as tobacco was often used as a currency in Eastern Virginia, deer hides were used for trading in Western Virginia. In the first 2 decades of the 1700s, Virginia exported 14,000 deer hides per year. Deer and other wildlife were hunted not only for subsistence, but also for commercial profit. At the peak of market hunting in the late 1800s, literal train loads of deer carcasses were shipped from rural states like Virginia to cities like Philadelphia and New York. Venison brought a good price and hides were still sold. However, the Lacey Act of 1900 outlawed interstate commerce in wildlife parks. So if we look at the historical decline and rebound of deer, we'll see that both habitat and population factors were involved. Even though we don't have a good estimate of deer population before European settlement, it's not like there were deer running through a turnstile or there was someone out there counting them. We have a pretty good idea based on our best guesses, which is represented by the dotted line on this chart. So looking at why deer declined in the first place, a big part of it was habitat loss, wholesale deforestation. European settlers came in and we just devastated the forests. Ineffective laws protecting wildlife. There was no regulation. And the overharvest of deer for subsistence and commercial reasons led to the near extinction of deer in the early 1900s. If there was an endangered species list back then, deer for sure would be on it. And then looking at the rebound, factors that contributed include the establishment of our wildlife agency in 1916, a dedication to enforcement of new and regulated game laws, intentional stalking of deer into areas of Virginia where deer had been extirpated, reforestation that occurred when farms were abandoned and large numbers of people moved to the cities, and urbanization. Urbanization is a double shot for deer, more fragmented landscapes and more areas off limits to deer hunting. Through regulated hunting, designed to control deer numbers, our statewide deer population has stabilized and actually decreased some over the last couple of decades, although there are areas with overabundant numbers. And Northern Virginia, we'll see here in a second, is such an area. But I would like to note that although major deer predators were overexploited along with deer, they were not restocked or allowed to rebound until recently. We have bears, coyotes, and bobcats, but they're not as effective predating deer as wolves and mountain lions, which we had before the 1800s. So the lack of other major predators has meant that humans have had to take that role in controlling numbers. At the low point, deer existed only in parts of the Piedmont, Tidewater, and a few mountain counties. Perhaps only 50,000 deer were left in Virginia, and around 1/3 of the counties in Virginia had a hunting season. It would have taken many years for deer to recolonize naturally across the entire state, so an intensive stalking program was begun in the 1930s. For the next 20 years, deer were brought into Virginia from 11 other states and were stalked in Western Virginia. Just as the deer population has increased, so has the deer harvest or hunter kill. This graph shows years along the x-axis at the bottom from 1923 to the present, and the number of deer killed by hunters on the vertical or y-axis. Following some aggressive harvests in the early 1990s, the deer population began to decline. So hunting regulations were changed in an attempt to stabilize populations. Think of regulating harvest like driving a car. Sometimes you have to push on the gas pedal to set the season limits to kill more deer, and sometimes you have to put on the brake to set seasons to kill fewer deer. So these are the 7 tenets of the North American model of wildlife management, and they're really our guiding light in terms of how we manage all wildlife. Wildlife is a public trust that's owned basically by the people. Elimination of markets for game, allocation of wildlife by law that sets up our DWR, Department of Wildlife Resources, as the state agency. The state owns the wildlife for the good of the public. Wildlife should only be killed for a legitimate purpose, which means fair chase. Which includes fair chase. Wildlife are considered an international resource. Science is the proper tool for discharge of wildlife policy and democracy of hunting. So I want to introduce you to the idea, if you haven't heard of it before, of cultural carrying capacity, as that'll make sense as we move on along the presentation. A good way of thinking about cultural carrying capacity is a tug of war between who want more deer, like hunters, and those who may want fewer deer, like farmers. It's not easy to determine that level, and determining cultural carrying capacity remains a central challenge to successful deer management. So we manage deer in Virginia based off a deer management plan. We have statewide management plans for deer, bear, wild turkey, and elk. It's basically our constitution for the deer program. It directs all deer management programs. It's developed to represent all citizens, not just hunters. It provides history, status, programs, goals, and objectives and strategies. It's important to know that this management plan is strategic. It's not operational. Example, you use hunting to control deer populations, but doesn't tell us the season for every county. And it provides the basis for regulations on how we manage deer. This map shows deer relative abundance. Now, deer are present and abundant over the entire state, unlike the previous map I showed you. This map shows relative abundance between areas where deer populations are particularly dense in the red to areas where there are fewer deer, green. So even though those areas, deer are considered a common species. This relative abundance is based on an index of antler male deer or bucks killed by hunters per square mile of habitat. And then this map shows our objectives. One of the most important components of the deer management plan are the objectives for how large the deer population should be. This map shows those targets by county. For private lands, we have different objectives for large public lands like the national forests. Orange is our higher targets, and green and white are our lower targets. Each target has a population index associated with it, which is the number of bucks killed per square mile of habitat. And then this map combines the two concepts. So the relative abundance, red most, green and white the least. With the previous map showing the objectives of target numbers, the arrows show which direction we want to change the deer population and how far we want to change it. For example, a county in red, like Rockingham County, currently has a very abundant deer population, and we want to reduce it to a moderate density. Or a county with lower deer abundance, like Buchanan, may have an objective to increase a moderate yellow level. Those counties shown without an arrow currently have deer population densities at their target level. As you'll see, Fairfax is blacked out, and so are other areas of the state. That's because those areas aren't directly comparable to other counties due to differences in how hunting or differences in hunting pressure occur. So really those colors are meant to help us compare one county to the next. And just to give you an idea of what an example of what our deer index trends look like for a single county. This is Fairfax County's hunter harvest index, and it shows you where deer have been from 1994 to present on an index scale. As you can see, it's generally stayed within the low cluster of our target value from the previous slide. And the current objective is to get it down, get the index down to variable. And this is taken out of our Hunter Digest. This is just to show you, if you're not familiar, all the different color coding. When we talk about regulating deer management, it is something that we can control to local county areas. The full description of what all these different colors means can be found in the Hunter Digest. We can change season lengths to help achieve desired population objectives. And you'll see the black diamonds up in Northern Virginia. Those are what we call the bookend seasons or the extended hunting seasons. So why regulated hunting? Why are we talking about that so much today? Well, trapping and transferring deer is just not an option. As a bear biologist for a number of years, that was also not an option. You can't really move deer around like we used to back in the 30s and 40s because there isn't a place to take them to that aren't already occupied by deer. And you're talking about a lot of risk in terms of a disease spread as well. And then, so fertility control has been talked about a lot before. It's experimental. There's a couple different kinds. You can sterilize deer, and there's also birth control vaccinations. That really only works on closed populations where deer can't really escape, and you can actually get your hands on all of the deer. And even when you have sterilized or given deer birth control vaccines, the standing deer herd still remains. So all of the damage that those deer were doing, they're still going to be doing it. And then lastly, it's cost prohibitive. It costs $1,000 a plus per deer for sterilization, and birth control is not cheap either. And I'm sure we'll have more questions about that towards the end. And another thing to remember about the importance of hunting is that it does support, programs like Buy Local, Eat Local, or Field to Fork. There is a heritage. It's part of our human history. Hunting assumes the role of predators, as I mentioned before, we no longer have. And hunting is the preferred tool, which includes fair chase. Remember, it's one of the tenets of the North American model. It's more than just killing an animal. It's about feeding family. It's about connection to the land. It's about respect for our natural resources. There are laws that prohibit wanton waste, and DWR supports ethical and safe hunting and fishing. It also addresses some food insecurity issues through donations through organizations like Hunters for the Hungry. Challenges looking forward to the major ones that are not just in Virginia, but nationwide. There's a general loss of deer hunters as a way of life. Like most states, Virginia has been losing all types of hunters, including deer hunters, over the last several decades. This is due to pursuit of other pastimes and sports, increased urbanization, the aging traditional hunter base. There are several negative consequences, a decline, like I said, the traditional way of life, a loss of operating revenue for agencies to do conservation work for all types of species, not just those species that are hunted. Most state wildlife agency funding comes from hunting and fishing licenses and taxes on sporting goods. And that reduces our ability to meet deer population objectives with ramifications across society. This remains a difficult challenge with many factors beyond the control of wildlife agencies and partners we work with. However, we continue to work hard on programs to recruit, retain, and reactivate hunters, as we have seen some progress in areas like increasing access and increase in non-traditional hunters. And then chronic wasting disease. That one is one that has potential population level impacts. There is a potential for human health concern, and it has potentially reduced interest in hunting. What is chronic wasting disease? It's a neurological disease in deer, in elk and moose. It's 100% fatal. The clinical signs include a loss of fear of humans, drooling, their head will be drooped down, their ears will be dropped down, they'll have a wide sawhorse-like stance. It's caused by what we call it a prion. It's basically a misfolded piece of DNA that gets into the brain and just creates holes in the brain. But from the time that they are exposed to a prion to the time that they start showing signs of the disease, it takes about 1.5 to 2 years. So most animals that have it don't look sick. There's no, symptoms at all really that they see. Once they start to exhibit symptoms, they have about just a month left to live, basically. From all the testing that we've done, there's only been 5 sick acting CWD positive deer in Virginia. And since CWD came into Virginia in 2009, we've detected 181 positives through testing. It's spread by direct contact from deer, between deer, or by environmental contamination, and it's spread through deer urine, feces, or saliva. The protein, those prions can survive in the environment for years. In the soil, they can be retaken up by plants, and deer can come along and eat those plants and become infected. And we had our first positive found just last year. I'm going to go back to our map in Fairfax. That red dot is our first one in Fairfax. So it is here. Important note about disease is feeding of deer. This is kind of an aerial image of all the different tracks in the snow that deer left from a bait site in the winter. So you can see that deer kind of coming over from all around and potentially spreading that disease. So we really say don't feed the deer. It is illegal in disease management areas affected by CWD. It can also artificially increase the carrying capacity, and which could result in habitat vegetation damage. As I said, the concentration will increase disease transmission. It can also promote unnatural behavior and movements. It can cause deer to potentially injure humans. And another big issue is that it can increase road crossings, which can be lethal for deer and occasionally people. And this is kind of the nuts and bolts of my portion of this presentation, is that kind of what our role is in DWR and in urban deer management for Fairfax. We offer management programs directed by our management plan, as I showed you before. We regulate hunting. We issue out-of-season kill permits to citizens or officials per Code of Virginia. We permit special deer programs to help control deer by local governments. We inform, educate about lethal and non-lethal options like we are here today. We do not conduct the urban deer removal operations. We do not conduct deer population surveys for communities or localities. What we really try to do is enable local deer management rather than impede it. The role of the local government is to determine the threshold for management action themselves, conduct assessments to monitor resident opinions or impacts, not the deer population itself, develop management programs in collaboration with us, and choose appropriate management options consistent with the law and code. So in summary, there are a variety of programs available, and in the short time I have to cover all of that here today, we can't really get into the in-depth of it, but those programs focus on antlerless deer reduction, and also there are limited non-lethal options like I expressed before. And so that wraps it up for me, and I will pass it over to Dr. Edwards.
Thank you, Jordan, and good morning to everyone. I'm Katie Edwards. I'm the Wildlife Management Specialist with Fairfax County. Today, I wanted to just kind of piggyback on what Jordan was saying in terms of local government operating deer management, how we partner with the DWR. So I'll just be giving a very brief overview of the Fairfax County Deer Management Program. And I believe, Jordan, were you advancing slides or?
I am, I guess.
Okay, thank you. So while the DWR has oversight of deer management in Virginia, as Jordan mentioned, localities have the ability to adopt and implement management programs under the DWR's purview at the local level to address overabundant deer and conflicts posed by deer. Following the first fatal deer vehicle collision, which occurred in Fairfax County in 1997, The Fairfax County Board of Supervisors mandated development of the Fairfax County Deer Management Program. This was in response to concerns from residents about the growing number of deer and conflicts posed by overabundant deer. The program has now been ongoing for over 25 years. The Fairfax County Deer Management Program, oh, sorry,
Oops,
go back.
Sorry.
We haven't synced this, as you can see. The program is operated primarily on county-owned properties. It's operated through the Fairfax County Police Department in collaboration with our Fairfax County Park Authority, Nova Parks, and other public landholders. Over the years, the deer population within Fairfax County has grown to levels that pose safety and health hazards in our communities and is not sustainable by the environment over time. Jordan briefly mentioned these, but in terms of safety concerns, we see serious concerns over a high number of deer vehicle collisions that occur annually in Virginia and here in Fairfax County. According to a recent State Farm report that was just released in September of 2023, Virginia now ranks 9th in the nation in terms of the likelihood of having collision with deer. In terms of health concerns, we do hear a lot about public concern, especially related to tick-borne illnesses and the role that deer play in maintaining tick populations or spreading tick populations. Again, we also have concerns for deer herd health itself, as Jordan mentioned, especially with the emergence and spread of chronic wasting disease in Virginia and now here in Fairfax County. We also hear a lot of concerns about ecological damage. Overbrowsing by deer has a profound impact on our environment and has led to the destruction and degradation of many of our forested habitats. I'm not going to go in depth on that because Bill is going to cover that nicely in his presentation, but the program essentially was developed as a public safety program and then expanded over the years to address all of these concerns to minimize impacts on humans and wildlife alike. All right, you can go forward now, Jordan. Thank you. The Fairfax County Deer Management Program was developed based on best management practices for deer management by looking at deer census data, environmental impact studies, looking at what other jurisdictions are doing, peer-reviewed scientific literature. We use the state-approved deer population control measures, which are archery, firearms managed hunts, and sharpshooting through the police department. We also do a lot of consultation with HOAs and private landholders about ways to mitigate deer damage on their properties. So whether that's using fencing, different repellency measures, different vegetation plantings that might be less palatable for deer, we do a lot of that coordination and communication with Fairfax County residents. Advance, please. So as Jordan mentioned, the Virginia Department of Wildlife Resources, I'm going to refer to them as the DWR, has created various management options that are available to landowners and municipalities who are experiencing damage associated with deer or who have tried mitigation measures, but they were just not successful. Within Fairfax County, our deer management program operates under two different programs. One is the Deer Population Reduction Program, or a DPOP permit. This is a site-specific urban management tool. It prioritizes the harvesting of antlerless deer and allows hunters to take extra deer that are not on their own tag. So we operate DPOP primarily through our county's archery program and then through our managed shotgun hunts. We also operate under a kill permit. These are issued to landowners that are experiencing commercial or personal property damage. These are different than other permits in that they can allow for conditions that are not associated with recreational hunting, such as being able to kill deer at night or with special authorization over bait. So we use a kill permit for police sharpshooting operations within Fairfax County. Advance, please. As Jordan indicated, the DWR really sets the population management objectives for the state and for localities. And as you saw in the maps that he presented, the areas within Northern Virginia, including Fairfax County, all had that downward arrow indicating that they are identified for deer herd reduction and trying to lower the deer population within these areas. Given the high number of deer, The DWR has really created several regulations and mechanisms to assist in reducing the number of deer within Fairfax County and our surrounding jurisdictions. One being that we have an extended hunting season. So within Fairfax County, deer can be hunted from the beginning of September to the end of April. This is essentially the longest deer season that I'm aware of in the country. And this was enacted given the high number of deer that we have in Northern Virginia to be able to allow increased hunting opportunities over that time period. We also see liberal bag limits in terms of daily bag limits and seasonal bag limits, especially with antlerless deer. So the daily bag limit in Fairfax County for antlerless deer is unlimited, but no more than 3 antlered deer can be harvested in a license year. Programs such as DPOP also increase that availability with allowing additional tags for antlerless deer. The DWR also operates under a regulation known as Earn-a-Buck. This again was designed to control deer populations by focusing on female deer harvest and taking of extra antlerless deer before being able to harvest antlered bucks. The combination of these strategies really sets the framework for our deer management program and provides the foundation of what we're doing to try and reduce the population here in Fairfax County. You can advance, please. Now, while the DWR has really kind of set us up in a good position with these liberal regulations to enact deer management within Fairfax County and within Northern Virginia, local ordinances also have to be followed. And so what we see a lot, especially in urbanized areas, where you're dealing with smaller parcel sizes and a very high dense human population, sometimes these local ordinances can eliminate options for deer management without having to change county code. So that is something to be considerate of. A lot of times there's bans or restrictions on use of projectiles. There might be restrictions on parcel size requirements for hunting. So if you are in a locality that is looking at deer management, you'll either have to look and see what alternative methods might be available, or this might require amendments to county code in order to allow for hunting or deer management options. Within Fairfax County, again, we're not very different from all the other counties up here. Very high human population, very dense, very urbanized. We have very strict firearms restrictions through most of the county. So that does limit the options that we can have for deer management and has required us to look at alternative methods, including archery. Archery is permitted within Fairfax County on public and private land. However, it does have to be conducted in accordance with county weapons code. Our county code shown here for shooting of bows and arrow guns essentially prohibits the shooting in a manner where it's reasonably expected to, prohibits shooting of a bow in a manner that can be reasonably be expected to land on another's property without permission. So you have to shoot safely. It can't cross the property line without permission. However, we do not have any restrictions in terms of parcel size or minimum acreage requirements. So this allows us to really use this method throughout a majority of the county when conducted in accordance with the weapons code. So I wanted to give just kind of a brief program history here. As I mentioned, the program's been ongoing for over 25 years. The early days of deer management focused solely on managed shotgun hunts and sharpshooting through the police department. We conducted archery as a pilot program. It was initiated in one park in 2000. We had this pilot for archery going on until 2003, but because of insufficient harvest during that time, we halted archery and went back to the drawing board and continued managed hunts and sharpshooting at that time. We continued to watch the progression of archery and the success that bow hunting organizations were having on private land within Northern Virginia. And so we went back and looked at kind of what they were doing on private land and were able to adopt some of those practices to develop the county archery program. So we redesigned the county archery program in the 2009-2010 deer hunting season and rolled that out and expanded it beginning that year. And it's now the primary management method that we use in Fairfax County. You can go forward, please. So these are just the harvest numbers from that early period from the beginning of the deer management program in '98 until 2009, before we had the redesign and expansion of the county's archery program as we know it today. In these early days prior to archery, the harvest rates were very variable. Again, these focused on managed hunts and police sharpshooting. The harvest strategy differed from year to year and from park to park. We were essentially only operating within maybe 2 to 10 parks a year. And this really was restricted based on staffing and funding that are required to operate those management methods. We piloted archery again in the early 2000s, between 2001 and 2003, but this was really operated under a different program model than what we see today. It had a very reduced season. Hunting was only allowed on select days of the week and within certain hours. So this greatly curtailed the ability of hunters to get out in the woods and resulted in only a small number of deer being taken. 16 deer were taken during those 3 years using archery. For comparison, Huntley Meadows is one of the parks that was piloted in the early 2000s. Excuse me. During those 3 years, 3, 8, and 2 deer were taken in Huntley Meadows. Comparing that to today, under the current archery program model that we have, hunters are taking 30 to 40 plus deer a year annually. So when the pilot was first developed, it was discontinued temporarily due to those limited numbers. We redesigned the program, looking at really allowing greater flexibility in the length of the season, the days that hunters could be active, and the hours they could be active to increase that harvest. So the map here shown on your screen, the areas highlighted in green show the current archery parks that we have today within the county's deer management program. The program operates annually with between 600 and 800 volunteer hunters and encompasses over 21,000 acres, which are primarily county parkland. Hunting is allowed Monday through Saturdays during legal hunting hours, which are 30 minutes prior to sunrise, extending throughout the day until 30 minutes past sunset. We allow hunting between September and February within the county program within these designated areas. All of the hunters have to abide by state game licensing and hunter education requirements. In addition to that, we make them go above and beyond, including additional training through the International Bow Hunter Education Program. They have to go through qualifications with their bows to be able to participate. They go through criminal background checks with the police department. And then they go through a lottery selection and hunter orientations to be able to participate. They have to abide by all state hunting regulations and local ordinances, and we require that they abide by strict rules of engagement and standards of conduct to be part of the program. We do allow hunters to harvest antlered bucks within the program, but they have to use their own personal tags. Again, as I mentioned, this program runs through the depot permit authorized by the DWR, which allows for increased antlerless tags for our hunters. So that is the primary goal, is to take antlerless deer, primarily does, to reduce the population more quickly within Fairfax County. This program is operated while parks remain open to the public because of strict safety measures that we put in place. And there have been 0 safety incidents since the archery program began and the deer management program began in Fairfax County over 25 years ago. The hunters that are selected for the program are assigned to a park cluster that has several parks within a general area of the county. They're able to move around to those different parks and hunt within those designated areas. Each cluster has several group leaders that are hunters that act as liaisons with our program management, myself and Sergeant Powell with the Animal Protection Police. All the hunting is conducted from elevated positions, which use the ground as a natural backstop, and we prohibit any hunting from the ground level within the county program. We place distance restrictions where hunting can occur that can't occur within 100 feet from a park property line or within 50 feet of an established park trail. Hunters are allowed to install their own equipment, but they're issued a unique hunter ID from our program managers, and they have to write that ID on all of their equipment, whether it's their tree stand, their arrows, game cameras that are left in the parks, so that we can tie all that activity back to that individual if we get any concerns or complaints. They also have to have a visible lanyard that's shown here and a hang tag parking permit shown on their vehicle. So if people see them out in the woods, if people see vehicles parked in an area, they will know that that is an approved hunter for the county program. Again, hunting takes place only during legal hunting hours. Only modern archery tackle is allowed through the program, which is compound bows and crossbows. In terms of removing deer from the park, we try to be as discreet as possible. We require that the hunters cover their deer completely when transporting them to their vehicles, so that we can be as discreet as possible for the public. And archers are not allowed to go onto private property without permission of the owner or tenant. When on site, we require that our hunters report a lot of information to us, and this is done so that we can monitor this daily and actively during the hunting season. The group leaders, as well as myself and Sergeant Powell, monitor these records regularly. In terms of hunting, they have to report the date, the park, the hunt times that they're there, deer that are observed, any of the archery tackle that they take in and out of the parks, shots taken at deer, deer harvested, as well as biological information on the deer, and then all of their checking requirements with the DWR, including their permit number and their confirmation number for reporting that deer. If anything out of the ordinary happens, we require that they report this as an incident. This includes deer that are not recovered, any signs of poaching that they observe, injuries, theft or damage to equipment, hunter harassment, or any other deviation to protocol. We require that they report to us. We also have them report to us any conversations that they have at length with residents within the parks, and that really gives us good feedback on if there's concerns with the program, if there's support with the program, or any specific complaints that we need to know about. Anyone that violates the rules of the program does face disciplinary action and may be removed from the program. If any laws are violated, they are reported to the DWR. So I want to switch gears here and just mention our other management methods, even though archery is the primary management method used throughout the county. We do also conduct managed firearms hunts. These are shotgun hunts that are done on a very restricted scale, again, due to the firearms restrictions within Fairfax County. These are operated very similarly to the archery program, in which they use volunteer hunters that have to go through screening requirements, weapons qualifications, similar to archery for these hunts. We do bring in personnel on these days. While the archery program's open to the public, parks are closed in terms of for public safety for managed firearms hunts. So we do bring on police personnel and security, shut down the parks on these days, have security staged around these areas while this is conducted. We typically have only been conducting this every few years within the Sully Woods area, which is over in the Centerville Cox Farms area. But because of reduced harvest over the years, we've really kind of curtailed this and put this on hold for now and transitioned most of that property into the archery program. But we do retain this as a management method for potential future use. Sharpshooting is the other primary management method that we use in addition to archery. And this is done on a much reduced scale as well, typically in parks where we cannot put a hunter, including sports fields, botanical gardens, or areas that are just not conducive to having active hunting. This differs from hunting in that these are actual culling operations conducted at night by the Fairfax County Police Department. The park is secured. We bring in police officers and security to close the park down, have officers stationed around park entrances to prevent access during these times. All the shooting is conducted at a static location over bait, such as a ladder stand, and uses the ground as a natural backstop. We use thermal imaging and suppressed firearms to make this as discreet as possible. We set up camera stations during these operations before and after, so we continue to monitor the deer population throughout that entire process. And this is operated under a kill permit by the DWR to allow this to occur at night and over bait. All of the shots that are taken are done to align with standards for humane euthanasia of free-ranging wildlife according to the American Veterinary Medical Association. And all of the deer that are harvested from sharpshooting operations are donated to local food banks, including Hunters for the Hungry. We try to be very transparent about the deer management program here in Fairfax County, and public notification is a crucial part of that process. For any parks that are in the program, we mail notification letters to immediate property owners bordering the parkland within a set distance. Within this current season, we sent about 25,000 letters out to Fairfax County residents. We conduct public information meetings or webinars that are posted on our website. We will go out and meet with HOAs and civic groups at their request if they have concerns about a park near their community or just want some more information on the program. And we've done numerous press releases and blogs through either the police department, the county office of public affairs. Many of these are posted on the Fairfax County YouTube channel or aired on the local Channel 16 station. We also maintain a deer management website, which has detailed information about the program. And then we post signs within the archery parks to visibly alert people if they're going into a park that is included in deer management. Jordan touched on this briefly, but it is a common question that we get with deer management is whether non-lethal alternatives have been considered. And so we do hear a lot of concerns about the use of hunting primarily, and whether there are alternatives that can be used in place of hunting. And so I do want to say that we have examined these methods. It's frequently brought up about whether fertility control, either surgical sterilization or the use of birth control vaccines can be used. There is Virginia code that prohibits the use of drugs in vertebrate wildlife. So this decision is not up to Fairfax County. It's state code that restricts the use of drugs, including drugs used for fertility control within deer. Aside from the legality part of it, studies have shown that there is limited effectiveness with fertility control in open free-ranging deer populations, especially at a large scale, such as the size of Fairfax County. It's only been allowed for scientific study within Virginia. Some of you may have been familiar with a study that was conducted in the city of Fairfax several years ago. But ultimately, we see a lot of challenges associated with these methods, including that you have to treat a very large portion of the deer population. It's recommended over 90% of the deer population. There's issues with accessibility and approachability of deer because these require chemical capture. And then vaccine boosters, depending on, if you're going the vaccine route. And it's also very cost prohibited. So in terms of the birth control vaccines, you're talking probably somewhere in the range of $500 per deer. And then with surgical sterilization, it could be anywhere between $1,000 and $1,500 per deer on average. We're also asked again about whether we can just take the deer and move them to another location. This is actually something that's not uncommon for us to hear, is whether we can take the deer and move them out to Shenandoah National Park or a larger block of contiguous forested habitat. This is not something that we're able to do. Wildlife relocation is prohibited within Virginia, but there have also been numerous studies looking at translocation of deer and impacts on the deer themselves. And deer actually show very high mortality rates due to something that we call capture myopathy when they're moved and transplanted into an unknown location, unfamiliar location to them. It's also very labor intensive. And again, there's lack of suitable release sites because most areas within Virginia have a high number of deer. And then also, as Jordan mentioned, the concern over the spread of diseases, specifically chronic wasting disease within Virginia. We've also been asked whether we can reintroduce more predators into the area. In terms of predators, we would be talking wolves and mountain lions really to manage the deer population. We do have coyotes, bears, and bobcats to an extent, but they're not typically taking enough deer to effectively reduce the population. But it's not practical nor safe for us to be reintroducing large predators into a highly urban area such as Fairfax County and the surrounding jurisdictions. So that's just not a viable method for us. I've gone ahead and include just the general harvest totals since the deer management program began back in 1998 in Fairfax County. You'll see the sharp increase with the green bars here. That's when the archery program was redesigned and expanded beginning in fiscal year 2010. Over the course of the program's history, we have harvested over 15,000 deer within the Fairfax County Deer Management Program. Again, those have increased substantially within the past 14 years with archery contributing overall since that time about 82% of the total harvest. I mentioned with sharpshooting that we donate to Hunters for the Hungry and other local food banks. Also with the archery program, our hunters keep the deer either for themselves to provide food for their families, or they donate that deer to either park neighbors, friends, family, or food banks, and we track that information to know how many deer are being donated. The graph and table shown here show the number of deer donated specifically to Hunters for the Hungry and other donations over the past 7 years. This is through last deer season with all management methods. 2,066 deer that were harvested through the Fairfax County Deer Management Program have been donated for food over the past 7 years. This equates to a conservative estimate of about 62,000 pounds of donated venison to support those in need. So this is something that we provide to the community as a product of the deer management program. Now, we mentioned earlier the kind of the whys of why we have deer management: conflicts posed by deer, including environmental damage, public safety hazards with vehicle collisions. And so we actually collect as much data as we can in order to evaluate and monitor deer management within Fairfax County to see what the impact of our program is having and if we need to adjust operations. I'm not going to have time to go into all of the data that we collect at this time, but I did want to showcase at least the deer vehicle collision data that we have. The graph and table shown here are for reportable deer vehicle collisions within Fairfax County. Reportable deer vehicle collision is one that is reported through police records, through the traffic records electronic data system known as TREDS. These include accidents that have resulted in either injury or fatality to residents or extensive property damage over $1,500. So not every accident that happens with deer is a reportable collision, but this is the most consistent form of data that we have in terms of county level records for deer vehicle collisions, or DVCs. And what we see is that we have a declining trend in reportable deer vehicle collisions over time. According to data from TREDS, we have about 103 reportable DVCs on average since 2010, ranging from 75 to 120 DVCs a year during that time frame. Again, this trend has been declining over time. It has remained lower since the addition and expansion of the archery program. However, we know that there's multiple other factors that are involved in deer vehicle collisions that are not solely related to the deer population or deer density. So we can't attribute that solely to deer management efforts at this time without further analysis. And as Jordan mentioned, chronic wasting disease is really at the forefront of what we're dealing with deer management here in Virginia. Unfortunately, CWD was detected in Fairfax County this past deer season. This is the first detection and only detection known to date within the county. The DWR has partnered with our staff to be proactive in conducting surveillance over the past several years because we knew this disease was on the horizon. Fairfax County has now been added to Disease Management Area 2. This is a management area that is determined by the DWR. It includes Fairfax County as well as our surrounding localities, including Arlington, Culpeper, Fauquier, Loudoun, Madison, Orange, Page, Prince William, and Rappahannock counties. Following the detection within Fairfax County and its inclusion in the DMA, there have been new regulatory actions that have been placed, including restrictions on deer carcass transport, a prohibition on the rehabilitation of deer fawns, and a year-round feeding ban that are all in place to try and reduce the spread of CWD. We've also worked with the DWR over the years and are increasing our surveillance measures here within Fairfax County. I've included a couple links here below to our Fairfax County resources, including a general kind of PSA that we did when CWD was first detected here in Fairfax County. As I mentioned, our staff have partnered with the DWR to try and be proactive in terms of surveillance, and we've been conducting voluntary surveillance for CWD over the past 5 years, knowing that it was spreading in this direction and would likely eventually make it to Fairfax County. Our staff trained with the DWR biologists and wildlife health staff to learn how to take samples from deer and work in partnership with them to send these to the lab for CWD testing. We are sampling lymph nodes from harvested deer within the county program. These are sent to a lab at the Wisconsin Veterinary Diagnostics Lab for CWD testing. And to date, all of the results that we've had back from county parkland through the county program have come back as no CWD prions detected. All the results are reported to our staff and also jointly to the DWR State Wildlife Veterinarian and Wildlife Coordinator. This is just the breakdown of the number of deer that we've sampled over the years. I did not include this season's currently since we're still in the middle of deer season, but we have increased testing each year since we first started conducting voluntary surveillance back in the 2019-2020 deer season. The majority of samples that we have submitted for testing are from hunter harvested deer through the county's archery program. And deer hunters really play that critical role. Without their assistance, we would not be able to conduct the surveillance efforts that we have here. As of last season, 79% of the total samples that have been submitted for CWD testing within Fairfax County have been from hunter harvested deer through the county's archery program. As of this week, we actually hit a milestone. Not sure that's something to really celebrate when we're dealing with a disease of this magnitude, but we were able to test over 1,000 deer now since we've started testing back 5 years ago. We've hit our 1,000 deer mark in terms of submission for testing of CWD through county efforts. I think that's all I had in terms of the overview of the county program. So I will pass it over to Bill to talk more at length about specifics within Arlington and the efforts of the Arlington Regional Master Naturalists, and then definitely take questions at the end.
Thanks, Kate. Thanks, Katie. I first became interested in this topic about a decade ago when I saw Katie give a presentation to Prince William Forest, and I think Jordan's predecessor was probably also there. And then as my work in the Arlington Regional Master Naturalists evolved, I was involved with a habitat restoration at a small urban park. The graph on the right-hand side is something that Jordan talked about early. He talked about the decline in population and the increase in population. But what the current situation is on the left-hand slide is my neighborhood. And my neighborhood is close to Potomac Overlook Park, one of the Nova Parks regional parks. It's also close to the Potomac River. And there's plenty of places for the deer to sleep, but they have eaten out the forest and they're coming into our neighborhood and eating everything else. On the left-hand side, you'll see one of my colleagues holding up 5 pounds of vegetation. He's holding up English ivy, and that's not exactly what deer prefer. It's actually much more dense than what they prefer, but if you can, so you can picture the volume of what they're eating, that works out to be about a ton of deer, a ton of vegetation per year. So that picture here is a Lacey Woods. It's a park, neighborhood park in Arlington. It's pretty well protected by fast roads surrounding the park. And so the understory is pretty well intact. Some of that's invasive, some of it's native, but there is a habitat there for ground nesting birds to live in. The next slide, please, is an indication of a forest where there is no protection from the deer, and they have marauded their way through that park, and they've eaten out the understory, and there's nowhere for the birds, the ground nesting birds, or the pollinators to have a life. They cannot exist in this forest. Next slide, please. Now there's an example of 3 different nesting birds, ground nesting birds that we enjoy here in Northern Virginia. There's the wood thrush, the brown thrasher, and the towhee, and all of them build their nests in shrubbery that the deer have destroyed. So I was giving a presentation in one of our civic associations, and I had a question from the audience that said, well, why don't the birds just build their nests higher? Well, the birds can't do that. They've evolved for this lifestyle over the course of a couple million years, and this is what they want to do. And the deer are now destroying that place for them to have their young. Now, this is an example of habitat destruction for pollinators. The one that I want to point out here for this particular audience is the last one on the list, the Baltimore checker spot. That plant they rely on, the white turtlehead, is its primary source of food. Nova Parks has the Meadowlark Botanical Garden in Vienna, and they've made an effort to reintroduce the habitat for the Baltimore checker spot. And part of the way they've created the habitat is they put up, as I understand, I haven't actually observed it, as I understand it, they put up a deer fence around the piece of land where they're growing the white turtlehead plant. The habitat is also destroyed for other things: amphibians, turtles, salamanders. They all live in the ground level, obviously. And when the deer destroy the understory, their habitat is gone. So I never thought when I became a naturalist about the importance of variety of shrubbery for a variety of species. I assumed that if you lost a 3-foot shrub of, I don't know, of any kind of native plant, that the birds or the insects or the turtles and the salamanders would find another one to live in. But they have some preferences. They want to live in certain areas, and when they're gone, there's no options for them. This is something I've given to civic associations. I try to explain to them how lots of species rely on various stages of development of related species. For example, an oak tree drops an acorn, becomes a seedling, grows into a sapling. Ultimately, a tree generates more acorns. It's a whole full demographic life cycle of that oak tree species. The deer interrupt that species development at every different stage, almost every different stage. They eat the acorns, they rub the antlers on the saplings, and once the oak tree goes away, because the deer have eaten everything, the oak tree is not replaced by another oak tree. Next slide, please. We had a presentation by Professor okay, there's the video. This is a habitat, this is a scientific study in Cornell. I don't remember, I think it might have been on White Plains or somewhere in New York. And they were planting red oak seedlings, and there were some caged, there were some uncaged, and they were trying to determine the impact of caging and deer browse. And you can see right there, in a quick minute, the deer has just gone through the property and eaten everything that was planted and not protected by a cage. Arlington had a couple of studies done in the last few years to assess the deer population and the impact of the deer browse on our native areas. And one of the studies cited a 50% browse rate as to a benchmark where above 50%, the forest cannot regenerate itself. Below 50%, it's a moderate level of browse, and the forest can regenerate itself. What we actually had, they had one quote in the study saying that one biologist thought the preferred browse rate in a field, in a plot of land, would be 10%. Arlington officials, I don't think we could get to 10%, but what's clear in this chart, these are 10 different parks within Arlington where the contractor did a browse assessment. They did 2 different methodologies, and the details aren't important here, but bottom line, every single park that they sampled has an 80 to 100% browse rate. And if we think 50%, anything above 50% has an impact on the understory, well, then 80 to 100% definitely is a problem. When I started giving this presentation a few years ago, I started doing research about what other counties were doing. And like I said, I met Katie 10 years ago, and I started studying what Fairfax did. I looked into what other neighborhoods did. Even DC has some efforts going on in its national park. It's not DC government, but National Parks was doing it within the Rock Creek Park area. And Fairfax, and I learned how highlighted there, Arlington has no deer management. I also think within Fairfax County, there's a plot of land that doesn't have any deer management as well, and that might be Vienna. I don't know the geography that well. It says, yeah. Anyway, next slide, please. So we've gone through the science about why it's important to have deer management to control the growth of the forest and allow the forest to regenerate itself and provide habitat for these variety of species. And why is there no action? Why can we not get anything done? Well, lots of counties are getting some stuff done, but why is it so problematic? Why is it so controversial? Well, there's no one-time easy fix. You can't come in and do deer culling 1 year and go away and expect it to be a sustainable level of deer. It's going to come back year after year. You have to go in there all the time. It's also controversial. Some people don't like the idea. I don't like the idea of killing, but I do now, after studying as an ecologist for so many years, appreciate the value that culling and hunting has on the impact of the ecological systems we live in. Also, it's expensive, and municipalities don't typically adopt ecosystem preservation, biodiversity as a priority. They have other things that they're worried about. Pick your issue that you're worried about in your particular jurisdiction: homelessness, feeding people, crime, anything. There's lots of things that have become very apparent that the counties and cities need to worry about. And a 10, 15, 20, 50-year time horizon problem like forest regeneration is not at the top of their lists. The other problem for the lack of action is there's a well-funded opposition. The animal rights activists are very well funded. They're very well formed. They have great things they can cite. They're not always, in fact, I've never seen any peer-reviewed scientific literature to back up their statements, but it's actually a reality that the counties need to face. Doing nothing means we're going to give the deer the preferences. We're not going to protect that turtle. We're not going to protect the eastern towhee. We're not going to protect the Baltimore checker spot. We're going to give the deer let the deer decide how to manage our forests. One of our academic colleagues we've talked to referred to the deer as an ecological bully. And I love that term because that's what they are. They take over and they are determining how we are managing our forests. They are also undermining some of our restoration efforts. I told you my example briefly when we had some challenges at the beginning of my part of the presentation. When I started doing my habitat restoration in my little park in Arlington County, we did first couple of years, we took some junk out. We took kitchen sinks out, literally. We took invasive plants, soccer nets. It was a really messy park. When we started reintroducing plants, as soon as we got them in, the deer ate them up. So that was our labor wasted, but also the county generously gave us those plants, and whatever their costs they had incurred, that was wasted. And the other takeaway we try to leave with people is that this humans have intervened into this ecological system for centuries. We've messed it up. We need to intervene to restore the balance. We cannot expect the natural course selection work for us in this situation. We got rid of wolves and mountain lions for a pretty good reason, but they performed a useful function in terms of managing other things. We need to restore our efforts at controlling them. There's a quote, one of my new heroes, reflects the land ethic, reflects the existence of an ecological conscience, and this in turn reflects the conviction of individual responsibility for the health of the land. We need to accept responsibility. We've intervened with our environment. We've messed it up by taking wolves and mountain lions away. We need to get back involved with managing the problems we've created.
Anyway, so just to recap, who is on the DWR deer team? Justin Folks, is our deer project leader. He is responsible for regulations, harvest data, status reports, most public and staff contacts. Katie Martin, she is our deer, bear, turkey biologist. She is responsible for our management programs like DMAP, DPOP, DCAP, kill permit data, our captive deer exhibitors. We're concerned about that because of CWD. And other diseases, vehicle collision info, and animal handling contact reports. And me, I'm your district biologist. I help implement those programs. I help provide data input, and like today, provide outreach. And then the most important person on the deer team is you. And that concludes our slideshow. I'll leave you with this, another Leopold quote. The problem of game management is not how we shall handle the deer. The real problem is one of human management. And with that, I'll hand it back over to Ashley for questions.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I don't know if anyone else can do this in the React, but we can send a round of applause to our speakers. Thank you very much for that very interesting and also informational presentation. I ended up learning a lot about deer management, especially all of the small details that go into managing such a large program for so many people and for such a dense population. So that was really awesome. Thank you. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to add those into the chat. I have a couple of questions for our speakers that have come up already, and I'm going to try to go ahead and group those into categories of questions for us. So we had some health questions. And Ed wanted to know, can a person contract the chronic wasting disease from eating deer meat? Is it transmissible from deer?
So I can answer that one. The CDC recommends not eating deer that has tested positive for CWD. There's no confirmation that we know for a fact that it can infect humans, but in an overabundance of caution, the CDC is recommending no. Don't eat deer that are infected. Now, the test that we provide is not a food safety test. It is just a test that detects the presence or absence of the prions in the deer.
Okay, thank you. And then Barbara wanted to know, do the hunters kill the deer with the chronic wasting disease and dispose of them differently to make sure that they're not spreading the disease?
Yes, we do have best management practices in terms of hygiene when it comes to cleaning the deer and making sure that potential infected parts aren't getting out into the landscape. So what we really recommend are, the high risk parts are the brain, the spinal column, and the spleen, making sure that those parts are not left out on the landscape for other deer to collect. And the big part of why we have a disease management areas, if you recall that map that showed the blue zone counties, the reason that's a disease management area is to not transport deer parts outside of the areas that we're trying to control. And so it's part of us trying to reduce the likelihood of spread of the disease so that those high risk parts aren't leaving areas that are already, we already have had positive deer tested.
And I'll just jump in and kind of echo some of what Jordan's saying too. The DWR does have extensive information on their website in terms of those best management practices. So for handling deer, best management practices for processing deer for consumption, and then they also have the recommendations and list of disposal sites on there as well for deer that are any deer within a disease management area, recommendations for how to handle those deer.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just added that link to the chat. Good point, Katie. So, and that's another, highlight of why this is a partnership. It's really difficult for any one person to remember all these things and keep track of all of it. So I'm really grateful for the partnerships that we have in Northern Virginia.
Awesome. We also had some clarifying questions about deer biology and the process for managing those. Barbara wanted to know what you meant by bait when you were talking about hunting the deer.
So bait is only used for our sharpshooting operations within Fairfax County. So in terms of bait, we're talking about actual corn that is used to draw the deer to a potential area for those strategic culling operations. So that is only authorized for that specific purpose because we are removing the deer from the landscape through those operations. Other than that, feeding of deer, use of bait for hunting, or even feeding of deer recreationally is prohibited year-round within Fairfax County and within any of the other counties within the disease management area to try and reduce the disease spread. So that is a tool only authorized specifically for that particular use, and baiting is not allowed for recreational hunting or otherwise.
Thank you. Miriam would like to know if there are any other methods being considered to bring down the number of deer, because early in the presentation you talked about how we've got too many deer in Fairfax County. We would like to bring down those numbers, and you talked about the different methods you're considering. Are there any other methods being considered to bring down deer population numbers?
So in terms of what DWR allows, we're pretty much at the maximum. We really can't extend the season any further than we have. As Katie mentioned, we really do have the longest season in the nation, if not the universe. You can kill deer eight months out of the year in Northern Virginia. So really now it becomes a question of access and other potential programs on public properties and places that people are allowed to hunt.
And so within Fairfax County, we get a lot of emails and calls, especially to my office, of on both sides of the coin, either some that may not be fans of deer management or others that are thinking we need more deer management. And especially in areas on private land that are not bordering a county park where we have deer management, we do hear a high number of concerns about damage and overabundance of deer in those communities. And so part of what we do is to talk to them about those mitigation measures I'd mentioned, but also there are numerous organizations within the county, local hunt groups and organizations that do bow hunt on private land. And so we provide that as a resource as well. And so bow hunting does occur on private land throughout the county, either by landowners themselves or by partnering with these organizations to provide that service. So that is something that is ongoing, but it's not mandated or run through the county's deer management program. That is up to the individual landowner and that partnership that they have with an organization specifically.
Thank you. Barbara would like to know, do out-of-state hunters come to Virginia to hunt deer? And I guess even elaborating on that, does anyone who resides outside of Fairfax County, are they able to enter Fairfax County to kind of reduce the deer populations here, or do you have to be a resident?
Yeah, go ahead, Katie.
I'll speak to the Fairfax County program and Jordan can speak to the state as a whole, but within Fairfax County, we do not have a restriction that you have to be a county resident to participate. So we do have numerous hunters that come from outside of Fairfax to hunt within the program. Many of them do work here, so it's something that they have partnered with us so that they can hunt, to and from work. So the majority of hunters are from Fairfax County or work within Fairfax County, but we do accept others from outside. With our program, we're only accepting hunters that can basically commit to the length of the season. We do get requests from out-of-state hunters that want to join, just thinking that they can come and maybe hunt on a weekend if they're visiting friends or family. We do not admit people for those purposes because they have to go through all those extensive screening requirements. And if they haven't done that and commit to the program, they're not eligible.
Perfect. It's great to hear that you have all these protocols in place, making sure the system is really safe for everyone.
Yeah, in terms of the state regulation, we do allow hunters to come in from out of state. We do place restrictions on, like I said before, things like chronic wasting disease, transport of deer outside of our disease management areas. In terms of just in general, the state can set regulations, law, and then municipalities, counties, towns, cities can make those more restrictive, but they cannot make those laws more liberal.
Okay, makes sense. We had another question about, Barbara was really concerned about the drought that's been ongoing. I know we've all been talking about that a little bit as it's impacting a lot of natural resources. They wanted to know how the ongoing drought might impact deer population, if they might leave the area if there's more droughts, or how that might change.
Katie, you want to tackle that one?
I got nothing.
I was going to give that one to you. I honestly don't have a great answer for that one. It's not something that I've really studied extensively in terms of the impacts of drought. Deer are relative homebodies, so I don't believe that they're going to be vacating the area in other areas, leaving a large distance to look for water in other areas. But I can look more into that and get back to you.
I will say that there are environmental factors that have happened over the years that we could actually see in the Hunter Harvest Index. The one that comes to mind are I think there were a couple of blizzards in the 90s where we saw that there were deer that literally starved to death because there was just so much snow on the ground they could not get to the vegetation. So there are environmental factors that can happen that will affect deer, and a lot of that, deer are probably one of the most studied animals on the planet, but there's still stuff we learn every day. So, things with climate change and drought, these ongoing changes, these are things that we definitely, try to monitor for and try to assess through any means possible. But it's a good question. And it's something that, as time goes on, that we definitely want to keep our eyes on.
Thank you. We've also had a lot of questions about deer browse and native plants. So just popping over to those briefly. Ginny in the chat mentioned that as a rule, deer don't really eat our non-native plants or invasive species, only our native plants, which is why it's really difficult to repopulate some of our parks with native plants, given the deer populations. So that was a great contribution with some background information. And then I think perhaps in response to that, Carolyn in the chat mentioned that they had an animal repeller predator controlled device on Amazon that looks like blinking lights that's kind of scared off some of the deer. So that kind of prevents some more deer browse. But Ruth was wondering how she can lessen deer damage to young trees and to native plants.
So let me try this one. There were 3 questions there that all deserve some attention. Ginny's comment about native plants is accurate. They prefer, deer prefer native plants. They're not, when they get hungry enough, they'll eat anything. I've had deer on my street eating grass growing up out of the pavement. So when they're desperate, they'll eat almost anything. I've put in plants in my park restoration after that. My natural resource managers told me deer don't prefer them and they're gone. But the other part of the native plant conundrum is that deer spread invasives. They pick up stiltgrass seeds on their fur and they walk around and they drop them somewhere else. So they're double-edged sword there. They eat what they prefer and they spread what we don't want spread. Now, so what we do what people are starting to do in Arlington, particularly the park stewards are working on some of the park restoration efforts. They are starting to protect their plantings with deer cages. We've got several different methodologies. We do that. Some people just use simple tubes. Some people use a couple of stakes and some real strong metal fencing around those stakes. I don't find, and I have not seen anybody have a great deal of success with repellents. I hear about people spraying stuff on plants in their home gardens, but they've got to reapply it after every time it rains, and you've got to be pretty diligent for that to be effective. When the plants get bigger and the cages become less useful because the plants outgrow the cages, what I've seen people do, and I haven't tried this yet in my park, is they put up sleeves, little sleeves around the bowl, the tree bowl, for example, to keep the deer from rubbing their antlers or along the bark.
I think this next one is probably for Jordan. Someone in the chat mentioned that they noticed that the Virginia Deer Management Plan runs through 2024. And what are the plans for updating the Virginia Deer Management Plan? And how does public outreach play a role into the management plan?
So yeah, that's a good question. We actually just finished our bear management plan update, and that was just accepted by our board. Having not been here for the previous kind of revamp of the deer management plan, I imagine it's going to be a little bit more robust than the last time. Looking at how our bear management plan was updated, we went through, for the bear management plan, we went through what's called a strategic decision-making process, where we really gather input from a variety of sources, as many as we can, really, from stakeholders all over the state. And so in terms of outreach, the citizen component of that, there's actually a committee that's formed that where folks are reached out to. There's a number of surveys that have been done in the past to try and get feedback from different areas of the state for a variety of topics. So yeah, that's a really good question. So that is going to be starting up here soon as we look to update that plan. So yeah, it's a pretty broad thing. If you look at our current management plan, you'll get a little bit of the sense of how that progresses, looking at how different groups of people have provided input. They're technical science advisors from outside of the agency, within the agency, and then just general input from the public as well.
Thank you. I think we had another question, and I think we actually had a couple of questions about specific jurisdictions, particularly the town of Vienna. But I know that we're primarily talking about Fairfax County's management. But I was wondering, Dr. Edwards, do you know anything about how some of our other local smaller jurisdictions do manage deer? Town of Vienna, City of Fairfax, City of Falls Church, City of Alexandria. Do you know if any of those smaller but local localities manage deer in any way?
The only management I'm aware of was, well, the only study that I was aware of in dealing with deer population was in the city of Fairfax with the sterilization study several years ago. To my knowledge, once that study was completed, there have been no management actions that have taken place following that. I haven't corresponded with them directly, so I can't be certain. But as far as I know, the other localities that you mentioned do not have active deer programs. We are reached out to by residents within the town of Vienna pretty frequently about whether anything can be done to manage the deer population, being that the town of Vienna is its own jurisdiction. It's something that we might be able to partner with them on if they were interested in deer management, but we would need the town officials to essentially reach out to Fairfax County to discuss that and what that would look like in some form of agreement. So, there is potential there. I can't commit to it. It's above my pay grade to sign us up for that. But we're open to that discussion. So if that is something that is seriously being considered, we welcome having those conversations to see if Fairfax can assist with management within the town limits.
Can I add one thing?
Yeah, go ahead.
I know in Arlington County, we've been working for several years now in educating the public on the deer overpopulation issue and its importance. And the county has responded in kind and done a couple of studies. So they're considering it. I would say that's all I'll say. They're considering it.
I'll say from DWR's perspective that, you know, I mentioned our management plan and how that is really guides us, and it's strategic but not operational. So anything that a municipality wants to see in terms of managing deer, that's something where, you know, meetings like this where we try to reach out to the public and kind of educate folks about the science behind deer management. But and this is where I say everybody plays a role. We're all part of the Bard Natural Resources. You're a part of the deer management team as well. Is that citizens do have the right and the ability to make their opinions known to their local board of supervisors, and that's really where the start of any kind of change is going to happen. Is from the citizens themselves getting educated, getting informed, and then being vocal about what their opinions are.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. I think this is a really good moment for us to go ahead and wrap up. I'm putting my email in the chat. If anyone has any last questions that they feel like were not accurately addressed, we'll make sure we get to those later. So I just wanted to thank everyone again for coming out and for joining us. Thank you again to our speakers, Jordan Green, Dr. Katherine Edwards, and Bill Browning for all of their expertise today. Yes, applause or claps in the chat or whatever you've got, because we really appreciated all of your time. Thank you again for joining us at another Green Breakfast. We'll get this recorded and sent out later this month. We really appreciate your time, and we will let you go into the rest of your weekend. I hope that you stay cozy and that you have a good one. Thank you.